My name is Odessa Lane. I am 23 years old. 5 years ago, I stood perfectly still in my family's living room in a quiet suburb outside Portland and watched my father throw my future into a stone fireplace. He held my Stanford acceptance letter up to the light, flicked his engraved lighter, and set the thick parchment on fire. I did not scream. I did not cry. I just stood there, watching the edges curl into black ash while my mother stood silently behind him, clutching the remaining envelopes in her hands. "You're staying home to help your sister succeed." My father, Daniel Lane, said calmly. He dropped the burning letter onto the flames and reached for the next envelope. "Avery needs stability," he continued. "She can't focus on her career if there's chaos in the house." My younger sister, Avery, was standing by the hallway, arms crossed, saying nothing. "We need you working full-time at the cafe," my mother added softly, "to help support her launch. Family supports family." Odessa, one by one, they burned every acceptance letter I had earned. Stanford, Berkeley, NYU, all gone. They believed that night they had destroyed my escape. They believed they had successfully trapped me into a minimum wage life, serving as a financial safety net for my sister's dreams. But what my parents didn't know was that the most important letter of all, a full-ride scholarship to Easton University, was folded flat and hidden inside my left sneaker. Before I tell you how I came back to that exact same living room 5 years later, driving a car worth more than their house, wearing a suit they could never afford, and delivering news that shattered their perfect illusion forever, take a second to like and subscribe, but only if you believe that people who hurt their own family will eventually pay the price. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from right now? And what time is it where you are now? Let me take you back to the night I walked away for good. To understand why my father burned my achievements, you have to understand the Lane family dynamic in our house. My younger sister Avery was the undisputed center of the universe. Avery was loud. Avery was demanding. Avery was special, at least according to my parents. By the time I was in high school, Avery had already dropped out of 2 different programs she claimed were beneath her every time she failed. My parents blamed the instructors, the system, or the pressure. When she decided she was going to become an entrepreneur and build something big, they refinanced our house to fund her lifestyle. I was the invisible daughter. I learned early that my grades, my discipline, and my ambitions were not seen as achievements. They were seen as threats to Avery's fragile sense of importance. When I brought home perfect report cards, my mother, Elaine, would quietly slide them into a drawer before Avery could see them. She would smile at me in a way that meant, "Be quiet. Don't make this harder." So I learned to disappear. I spent 4 years studying in silence. I filled out applications late at night on an old laptop I bought secondhand with my own savings. I paid every application fee myself using tips from long weekend shifts at the cafe. I knew education was the only way out of a house that treated me like unpaid labor. When the acceptance letters finally started arriving, thick and official, I made one mistake. I left them on the kitchen counter, just for a moment. I let myself believe that maybe this time they would be proud of me. They weren't. They saw an exit, and they decided to destroy it. But they misunderstood something fundamental about me. They thought fire would break me. I did not scream when the letters burned. I did not beg. I did not collapse. I stood there and watched every piece of my future turn into ash while my father held the lighter with a satisfied expression. Because I had spent 18 years learning one very specific rule inside that house. Any display of emotion was a weapon they would use against me. If I cried, my mother would call me manipulative. If I raised my voice, my father would call me unstable and ungrateful. And more importantly, I understood something they never expected me to realize. If I reacted, they would win. They wanted me to accept my role, the quiet one, the backup plan, the one who sacrifices so Avery can shine. So I gave them nothing. I stood there in the living room, breathing in the sharp, bitter smell of burning paper, and kept my face completely blank. When the final envelope collapsed into pale ash, my father brushed his hands together slowly, as if he had just finished fixing a problem. He gave me a short, approving nod as if he had just corrected a mistake. Then he told me to go to sleep because I had an early shift at the cafe, and Avery needed the house quiet to focus on her business strategy. I said goodnight. I turned around, walked up the carpeted stairs, and closed my bedroom door as gently as possible. Then I sat down on the edge of my narrow bed and waited. I waited for the television downstairs to turn off. I waited for my father's heavy footsteps to fade down the hallway. I waited for the soft click of my parents' bedroom door locking. I stared at the digital clock beside me, watching the red numbers change slowly in the dark. 10:30, 11:15, 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock. I didn't move. My heart was pounding so hard against my ribs I was sure it could be heard through the walls, but my hands stayed completely still in my lap at exactly 2 in the morning. I finally leaned forward and untied my left sneaker. I slipped my foot out and reached inside. Beneath the thin, worn insole, pressed completely flat, was the thick cream-colored envelope I had been protecting for days. I pulled it out carefully and smoothed the edges with my fingers. The official seal of Westbridge University caught the faint glow of my desk lamp. It was a full academic scholarship, tuition, housing, even a small monthly stipend. It wasn't just an acceptance letter. It was a lifeline. 3 days earlier, I had intercepted it before it ever reached the house. I already suspected my father had been going through my mail. I had seen rejection letters arrive, but my acceptances had somehow disappeared. So when I saw the mail truck that afternoon, I walked all the way down the driveway and met the carrier myself. I took the envelope, slipped it straight into my shoe, and walked back inside like nothing had happened. Now, sitting alone in the dark, holding that letter in my hands, I felt something cold and sharp move through my chest. Not fear, not sadness, clarity. This was proof. Proof that I was worth more than the life they had already planned for me. Avery was 24 years old, living in our basement, chasing her third big idea. Her first project had collapsed within months. The second drained thousands of dollars and disappeared without a trace. Now she was working on something new, something vague, something my parents called her breakthrough. They had built their entire future around her potential, and they had already decided mine didn't matter. Her first attempt had been a handmade jewelry store that collapsed within half a year. Her second was a lifestyle channel that drained thousands of dollars in equipment and never attracted a real audience. Now she was obsessed with launching an app. She did not know how to code. She did not understand business structure or financial projections. But none of that mattered. My parents had already refinanced the house again to support her, because Avery was the one who was supposed to succeed. Avery was the one who would prove that everything they believed about themselves was right. And me, I was just the extra piece, the backup plan, the worker, the one they could lean on when everything else fell apart. I stood up slowly and walked to the back of my closet. I pulled out a worn black duffel bag and set it on my bed. I didn't pack anything sentimental. No photos, no childhood memories, no yearbooks. Just what I needed to survive. 3 pairs of jeans, a few shirts, underwear, socks, my old laptop. Then I walked over to my dresser and opened the bottom drawer. I reached all the way to the back and pulled out a rolled pair of thick winter socks. Inside was $400 in cash. Money relatives had sent me for graduation. My mother had told me very clearly that any money I received belonged to the household, which really meant it would go toward Avery's expenses. So I lied. I told her I didn't get anything. Now I pushed the cash deep into my jeans pocket and zipped the bag shut. I slipped on a dark jacket, lifted the duffel bag over my shoulder, and paused. For a moment, I looked around the room. Everything in it felt distant, like it already belonged to someone else. Then I turned and opened the door. I moved down the stairs slowly, careful with every step. The wood creaked faintly beneath my feet, but my father's heavy snoring filled the house and swallowed the sound. When I reached the kitchen, the only light came from the moon slipping through the blinds, stretching long shadows across the floor. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my house keys, and placed them gently on the kitchen island, right next to the coffee maker, exactly where my father would see them in the morning when he woke up to make Avery her coffee. The soft metallic sound echoed louder than it should have. It felt final. I didn't hesitate after that. I walked out the back door and stepped into the cool Oregon night air. The bus station was 3 miles away, past the small commercial strip near the highway. I didn't call a ride. I didn't want any record of where I was going, and I couldn't afford it anyway. So I started walking. I passed quiet houses with perfect lawns and closed curtains. I looked at the dark windows and wondered how many of them were hiding the same kind of silence. The weight of the bag on my shoulder didn't matter, not compared to what I was leaving behind. With every step, something inside me felt lighter. By the time I reached the terminal, it was almost 4 in the morning. The place was harsh and cold under flickering fluorescent lights. It smelled like old coffee, fuel, and exhaustion. I walked up to the counter. The clerk barely looked at me. I asked for a one-way ticket to New York City. He typed for a moment, then told me the price, $95. I pulled the cash from my pocket and slid it under the glass. He handed me a thin paper ticket and pointed toward Gate 6. I nodded once and walked away without saying anything. The bus ride took 15 long, exhausting hours. I sat by the window near the back, watching the landscape blur past the dirty glass. Endless highways, gas stations, small towns that all looked the same. The engine roared beneath me, vibrating through the seat and into my bones. People got on and off at random stops across states I barely registered. Some passengers slept with their heads against the windows. Some argued quietly into their phones. Some stared blankly ahead like they had nowhere else to be. I stayed awake the entire time. I didn't cry. Crying is something you do when you know someone will catch you when you fall. I had no one. If I broke, there would be no one to pick up the pieces. So I forced my mind to stay sharp, focused, controlled. I ran through everything I knew about New York, the subway lines I had memorized, the streets around campus, the places I had read about late at night on my phone. I turned every ounce of anger into something solid, something I could carry with me, something that wouldn't break. But nothing could have prepared me for what it actually felt like to step off that bus. The moment the doors opened at the terminal in Manhattan, it hit me all at once. The noise, the movement, the pressure. It felt like walking straight into a storm made of people. Thousands of strangers moving with purpose, fast and focused. Car horns echoing outside, buildings rising so high they blocked out the sky and turned the streets into narrow concrete corridors. I stood there for a second, gripping the strap of my duffel bag tightly. Then I reached into my jacket and pulled out the envelope again. I needed to see it, to remind myself this wasn't a mistake. I had the acceptance. I had the scholarship. But when I looked closer at the details, something cold settled in my chest. Housing was included, just not yet. Move-in day was still 2 weeks away. 2 weeks. I was standing in the most expensive city in the country with just over $300 left. No place to stay, no one to call, no backup plan, no family. For all I knew, they thought I had disappeared. And if they didn't, they probably didn't care. That was the moment it really sank in. Leaving that house wasn't the end of anything. It was the beginning of something much harder. I hadn't escaped. Not yet. I had exactly 14 days to survive in a city that could swallow people whole without even noticing. And I had to do it without losing the grades required to keep the scholarship that was my only way forward. I took a slow breath, adjusted the weight of the bag on my shoulder, and stepped into the crowd. Those first 2 weeks were not survival. They were endurance. At night, I stayed inside a 24-hour diner in Queens, ordering the cheapest cup of black coffee and stretching it for hours. The waitress noticed eventually. She stopped asking me to leave. Sometimes she would refill my cup without saying anything. I slept in fragments. 10 minutes here, 15 minutes there, always with my arms wrapped tightly around my bag. Every sound snapped me awake. Every movement felt like a threat. I washed up in public restrooms, brushed my teeth in sinks that never fully drained, tried not to look at myself too long in the mirror. Food was simple, plain bagels, cheap, filling, enough to keep me moving. I counted every dollar and calculated every meal like it was part of a system I couldn't afford to break. I was scared all the time, but underneath that fear, there was something stronger, something hard, something unbreakable. I wasn't going to fail, not for them, not for Avery. If they wanted me to disappear so she could shine, then I was going to become so successful that it would be impossible to ignore. When move-in day finally came, I walked through the gates of Westbridge University feeling like I didn't belong there. The campus looked unreal. Perfect lawns, massive stone buildings, everything clean, structured, expensive. And then there were the other students. Families unloading brand new SUVs, boxes filled with designer bedding, parents setting up rooms like hotel suites, mothers hugging their daughters tightly, fathers taking photos with pride written all over their faces. I walked past all of it alone. I carried the same worn duffel bag I had packed in the middle of the night. When I stepped into my assigned dorm room, I set it down and checked my wallet. $42. That was everything I had left. The scholarship covered my tuition and housing, but it didn't cover what it actually costs to live in a city like this. Books, food, transportation. Everything had a price I could barely afford. So I moved fast. Within 2 days, I found work. I took the overnight shift at the campus library from midnight to 6 in the morning, organizing returned books and resetting study spaces. Then I slept for 2 hours. After that, I walked 3 blocks to a small coffee shop and worked the morning rush from 8 until noon, serving drinks to people who never once looked me in the eye. Then I went to class. Every day. My body felt like it was constantly on the edge of collapse. My hands shook from exhaustion and too much caffeine. There were moments I couldn't even focus on the words in front of me, but I never stopped, no matter how much my body ached. The exhaustion never compared to the weight I had carried for 18 years inside that house, in my dorm room. I was tired in a way that felt honest. It was physical, manageable, and more importantly, I was free. There were no sudden outbursts echoing through the walls, no careful steps to avoid triggering someone else's frustration, no constant pressure to make myself smaller so Avery could feel bigger. But freedom didn't mean distance. I had changed my number. I had cut off every direct line. Still, sometimes late at night, I would scroll through the public pages of extended family members, just enough to see what was happening without being seen. Avery was still living in the basement. She had already abandoned her last idea. Now she was completely focused on building an app that let users rate high-end organic pet food. It made no sense. There was no demand, no structure, no real product. But my parents treated it like she was building something revolutionary. One night, through a careless post from an aunt, I learned my father had withdrawn a huge portion of his retirement savings. He had spent it on a boutique design agency to create Avery's brand identity. I sat in the library at 3 in the morning, staring at my bank account. $18. That was everything I had left at that moment. And somewhere across the country, my father had just handed over tens of thousands of dollars for a logo. I didn't feel angry. I felt something colder, clearer. That was the moment everything shifted. I realized surviving wasn't enough. Getting a degree and finding a stable job wouldn't protect me. It wouldn't create distance. It wouldn't build a boundary strong enough to keep them out. Because eventually, they would fall. And when they did, they would look for me. They would expect me to step in, to fix it, to sacrifice again. They would call it responsibility. They would call it family. And if I was only stable, only comfortable, they would take everything I had built and drain it without hesitation. I couldn't just escape. I had to become unreachable, completely untouchable. I needed a level of power that couldn't be negotiated with, a level of success that couldn't be controlled or accessed. That realization stayed with me. It sharpened everything I did. The real turning point came during the spring semester of my second year. I was working a morning shift at the coffee shop, moving on autopilot, wiping down the espresso machine between orders. The place was always filled with the same type of customers: people in tailored suits, people who spoke in quiet, confident tones, people who made decisions that affected more money than I had ever seen in my life. That morning, 2 men stood at the counter waiting for their drinks, and I started listening. 2 men in tailored wool suits were standing at the counter, waiting for their drinks. They weren't trying to be quiet. "We just lost 10 million on that logistics startup," the older one said, pressing his fingers against his forehead. The pitch was perfect. strong background, clean projections. But the burn rate was completely out of control. Our models didn't catch any of it. The younger man stirred his coffee slowly. "The problem isn't the deal," he said. "It's the system. Every firm in this city is using the same outdated risk tools. They analyze market data, trends, past performance. But none of them can predict when a founder starts making emotional decisions. Desperation decisions." He took a sip, then added, "If someone built a system that could flag those behavioral warning signs early, before the money disappears, we'd buy it instantly, at any price." I stopped moving. The cloth in my hand stayed pressed against the counter, but I wasn't wiping anymore. My heart was beating so hard I could feel it in my throat, because I understood exactly what they were describing, not in theory, in reality, for the past year. I had been teaching myself how to code in the quiet hours between shifts and classes. At first, it wasn't about building anything. It was about understanding. I needed to make sense of something that had never made sense to me before. Why my parents kept pouring money into Avery's failures. Why they couldn't see what was so obvious. So I started tracking everything. I built spreadsheets, detailed ones. I mapped out every one of her projects, the initial funding, the spending patterns, the unnecessary expenses she prioritized over actual development, the exact point where everything collapsed. I turned her entire history into data. Then I started learning how to process it. I taught myself Python, slowly, late at night, with free tutorials and trial and error. At some point, it stopped being a coping mechanism. It became something else. I started building a system, not just to track what had already happened, but to predict what would happen next. A model that could identify the moment a business stopped being viable, before anyone else realized it, standing there, listening to those two men talk. I realized something that made my chest tighten. I had already started building exactly what they were looking for, and the foundation of it was Avery, her patterns, her decisions, her failures. She wasn't just my past anymore. She was my data set. I handed them their drinks with steady hands, but the moment my shift ended, I was gone. I went straight back to my dorm room and locked the door behind me. I didn't sleep that night, or the next, or the one after that. I stopped going to any class that wasn't absolutely required. I lived on water and whatever cheap food I could find. Everything else disappeared. I opened my laptop and started rebuilding everything from the ground up. What had been a simple tracking system became something far more complex. I rewrote the structure, expanded the inputs, designed the logic to process thousands of financial behaviors at once. Every transaction, every decision, every pattern, cross-referenced, tested, broken apart, rebuilt again. It was exhausting, frustrating, slow, but I didn't stop. Because this wasn't just about proving something anymore. This was about building something powerful enough to make sure no one could ever control my future again. Eventually, the system worked, not perfectly on the surface. It was rough, unfinished, missing any kind of clean interface. But underneath all of that, the core logic held. It was precise. I tested it against historical data from dozens of failed startups. Every time, it identified the collapse long before it actually happened, months in advance, patterns no one else had seen. The accuracy wasn't guesswork. It was measurable, 94%. I sat there staring at the results on my screen, barely blinking. This wasn't just a project anymore. It was power. The kind of power that could prevent massive financial losses. The kind of tool that people at the top would pay anything to have. But it didn't matter how good it was if it stayed trapped inside my laptop. I didn't have connections. No network, no investors, no one willing to open a door for me. I was still just a student working two jobs, constantly exhausted, constantly broke. I needed someone who wouldn't care about any of that. Someone who could see value without needing a perfect presentation. Someone ruthless enough to recognize what I had built and take it seriously. So I started looking. I spent nights researching firms across Manhattan, not the safe ones, not the polished, conservative investors, the aggressive ones, the ones that built their reputation by taking risks others wouldn't touch. That's when I found her. Victoria Vance, managing partner of Vance Capital. Her name showed up everywhere once I started looking. Financial journals, industry reports, articles that described her the same way every time. Brilliant, calculated, unapproachable. She specialized in high-pressure acquisitions, high risk, high reward decisions, the kind of investor who didn't wait for permission. She was exactly the type of person I needed. And then I found out something that made my pulse spike. She was scheduled to give a guest lecture at Westbridge University the following week. I didn't waste time thinking about how to reach her the normal way. There was no point. Someone like her wouldn't read my email, wouldn't take my call, wouldn't care about a student asking for attention. If I wanted her to see this, I had to force the moment. I had to make it impossible for her to ignore me. That was the moment everything shifted. This was no longer something I was building quietly in the background. This was a move, a calculated risk, the next step forward, the line between survival and power. The day of the lecture, I sat in the very back row of the hall, my laptop resting on my knees. I didn't speak. I didn't move. I just watched. When Victoria Vance walked onto the stage, the entire room shifted. She didn't rush. She didn't hesitate. She owned the space the moment she stepped into it. Her suit was perfectly tailored, sharp lines, precise details. Everything about her presence was controlled, and her expression completely unreadable. She was the managing partner of Vance Capital, a firm known for some of the most aggressive technology acquisitions in the financial district. For the next hour, I watched her dismantle 3 different business models without raising her voice once. She didn't need to. Her questions were precise, surgical. Each one cut deeper than the last until the students in front of her ran out of answers. She exposed every weakness in their logic with effortless control. It wasn't just intelligence, it was dominance. And as I sat there watching, I understood something clearly. She was exactly the kind of person I needed. When the lecture ended, the room surged forward. Dozens of students rushed the stage, holding resumes, trying to get her attention. I didn't move. I already knew how that would end. People like her didn't reward desperation. They ignored it. So I stood up quietly, slipped out through the back of the auditorium, and moved quickly down the hallway. I headed straight for the private elevators reserved for VIP guests. From everything I had read, she valued one thing above all else: efficiency. She wouldn't waste time in a crowded lobby. I reached the elevator and waited. My pulse was steady, but fast. If I got this wrong, I could lose everything: my scholarship, my place here. But playing safe had never worked for me before. It wasn't going to start now. A minute later, she appeared at the end of the hall, walking with her assistant beside her. She didn't even glance at me as she stepped into the elevator. Her assistant moved to block the door, but I was already in motion. I stepped past him and slipped inside just as the doors closed. He reached for the control panel, but she raised her hand slightly, stopping him. Then she looked at me. Her eyes were cold, focused, evaluating. Not surprised, not annoyed, just calculating. "You have until this elevator reaches the lobby," she said calmly. "Explain yourself." I didn't hesitate. "You just told that room your firm lost millions because your models couldn't predict a founder's emotional instability." I said, "I built something that can—" She didn't interrupt. "It tracks behavioral patterns behind financial decisions." I continued. "Spending spikes, impulsive changes, unstable compensation patterns. It compares them against real failure timelines." I held her gaze. "It identifies collapse before it happens. I've tested it on 50 failed companies." I said, "It predicted their collapse months in advance with 94% accuracy." The elevator kept ascending. Victoria Vance didn't react. She just watched me, measuring every word. "Who funded you?" she asked. "No one," I answered. "I built it in my dorm room, between my night shift at the library and my morning job at the cafe." I held her gaze. "I learned it by watching my parents destroy themselves financially, trying to fund my sister's failed ideas. I turned that pattern into data." The elevator reached the ground floor. The doors opened. She didn't move. Instead, she told her assistant to cancel her next meeting. Then she looked back at me. "Show me." We sat in a quiet corner of a campus cafe. I opened my laptop and walked her through everything: the data inputs, the behavioral signals, the prediction structure. She asked questions nonstop, sharp, complex, relentless. I answered all of them. 40 minutes later, she closed the laptop. "The interface is terrible," she said. "The system is unprotected, but the mathematics—" She paused. "Are dangerous." Then she leaned back slightly. "You're starting tomorrow. Paid internship. You work under my data team." Her tone didn't change. "If you fail, you're out. If you don't, we discuss ownership." That was how it started. For the next 2 years, I lived in constant exhaustion. I worked at Vance Capital over 60 hours a week while still keeping my scholarship. I barely slept. I stopped having any kind of life outside work. Everything became focused on one thing: building something untouchable. Victoria was relentless. If I made a mistake, she tore it apart without hesitation, then made me rebuild it. But unlike my parents, she pushed me because she expected more from me. For the first time, someone saw potential instead of weakness. By the time I turned 22, the system was complete. We tested it in real conditions alongside the firm's existing models. It flagged multiple failing investments early, saving tens of millions in losses. That's when everything changed again. I was sitting in her office overlooking the city when she placed a contract in front of me. A term sheet. $2 million in funding. I would keep majority ownership. Her firm would take the rest and scale it. It was everything I had been working toward. But there was a condition. "You can't run this while staying in school," she said calmly. "If you sign, you leave." I looked at the contract in silence. That scholarship had been my way out, the only proof that I could build something different. Walking away from it meant giving up the safety I fought for. But sitting there, I understood something clearly. Safety wasn't enough anymore. I picked up the pen and signed. Within a year, everything accelerated. The system was deployed across major firms. Contracts multiplied. Revenue scaled faster than I expected. And for the first time in my life, I was no longer trying to survive. The numbers grew faster than I expected. Within a year, the revenue was impossible to ignore. I left my cramped apartment and moved into a penthouse overlooking Tribeca. I bought tailored suits that cost more than my father used to make in a month. By the time I turned 23, my company was acquired by a global banking group for over $15 million. I kept my position on the board, and Victoria made me the youngest junior partner in the history of her firm. I had built exactly what I set out to build, a fortress. I lived above the city, surrounded by people who valued precision, intelligence, and results. People who respected me. I erased everything else. I didn't call. I didn't check in. I didn't exist in their world anymore. But while I was rising, my family was collapsing. Through a quiet investigation, I learned exactly how fast it was happening. Avery's app had failed. Completely. She had burned through every dollar my parents gave her. Then she borrowed more. High interest loans, predatory terms. My father signed every document without hesitation. He used the house as collateral. The debt grew faster than they could control. They were weeks away from losing everything. No more savings, no more backup plans, just panic and desperation. Avery was preparing one last attempt. She was sending out funding requests, hoping someone would believe in her vision. She had no idea where it would end up, no idea who would see it. I was sitting in my office on the 42nd floor when her pitch landed on my desk. Heavy leather cover, gold embossed logo. The company was called Silver Paws. I opened it slowly and began reading. It didn't take long. The model was broken from the start. She was asking for $500,000 to build a niche social platform where elite pet owners could review luxury organic food. No user base, no technical foundation, no real strategy, just language and illusion. The idea wasn't just weak, it was completely useless. There was no product, no users, no real technology, just polished language printed on expensive paper. I skipped the presentation and went straight to the numbers. Because in this world, the pitch is fiction, the financials are truth. As I scanned the data, something cold settled in my chest. Avery had already burned through $300,000, most of it wasted. Luxury office space, catering, branding consultants. Almost nothing went into actual development. But that wasn't the worst part. The real damage was buried deeper. She had taken out a high-interest business loan to keep everything afloat. And because she had no assets, the lender demanded collateral. I already knew what I was going to see before I reached the address, but I looked anyway. It was our house, the same house I grew up in, the same house where my father burned my future in the fireplace. He had signed the loan. My mother had co-signed it. They had risked everything they owned to support another illusion. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling for a moment. It wasn't just bad judgment. It was denial. They needed Avery to succeed. Not because she was capable, but because her success justified everything they had sacrificed. If she failed, it meant they were wrong. So they kept doubling down. even when it meant losing everything. A soft sound pulled me back. The door opened. Victoria stepped inside without knocking. A copy of the pitch already in her hand, she dropped it on my desk. "I've seen bad deals," she said calmly. "This one is impressive." I didn't look up. "You don't need my system for this," I said. "It's already over." She studied me for a second. "Walk me through it." I kept my voice steady. "If she doesn't secure 500,000 by the end of the month, she defaults. The lender moves immediately. The house is gone." Victoria nodded slowly. "The collateral is residential," she said. "Illinois." Then she looked at me more closely. "You know them." I glanced down at the signature on the page. I recognized every detail of it. "Yes," I said quietly. "The founder is my sister. The guarantors are my parents." She didn't react. No sympathy, no surprise, just calculation. "That explains the pattern," she said. Then she crossed her arms slightly. "I can have this decline today. Clean. Quiet." I turned my chair toward the window and looked out at the city below. That would have been easy. A single decision. A single email. Everything would collapse without me ever being involved. But that wasn't enough, because an email could be ignored, rewritten, twisted into another excuse. My father would find a way to blame someone else. He always did. He would never take responsibility for what he had done. I thought about that night. The fire. The smell of burning paper filling the room. The way he looked at me as if destroying my future was something justified. He had told me I was supposed to sacrifice everything so Avery could succeed. And for the first time, I understood something clearly. Letting this end quietly wasn't enough. I needed him to see it, to feel it, to understand exactly who was standing in front of him when everything collapsed. "No," I said, turning back to Victoria. "Don't send the rejection." She didn't interrupt. "Move them forward," I continued. "Invite them to present in person. Here." She studied me carefully. "You want them in this building?" she asked. "You want to sit across from them while they pitch this. They won't be presenting to the full board." I said, "Tell them they've been selected for a private review. With a silent partner." I could already see it unfolding. "They'll think they got lucky," I said. "They'll believe someone powerful is ready to fund them. They'll come here expecting a deal." Victoria's expression shifted slightly. A faint smile, cold and sharp. "You're building a trap," she said. "Yes." The meeting was set for the following Tuesday. I spent the next few days preparing, not just reviewing the pitch, breaking it apart. Every number, every transaction, every hidden detail. I ran all of it through my system. The results were exactly what I expected, and worse. The algorithm flagged patterns immediately. Luxury spending disguised as business expenses. A car lease buried under marketing costs. The entire structure wasn't just weak. It was unsustainable. The system flagged everything. Luxury dinners disguised as client meetings. Expenses that had no purpose, no return, no logic. I mapped it all out. Every inconsistency, every hidden pattern. Then I printed the data and organized it into clean black folders. This wasn't just a rejection. It was going to be a complete breakdown. The morning of the meeting. I woke up before sunrise. I stood in front of the mirror in my penthouse and studied my reflection. I didn't see the girl who arrived in this city with nothing. I saw control, I chose a white tailored suit, sharp lines, no softness. It was the kind of presence that didn't ask for attention. It took it. I paired it with a silk blouse and the watch Victoria had given me. Everything was deliberate. I wasn't preparing for a meeting. I was preparing for an ending. I arrived at the building early and walked into the boardroom alone. The space was designed to intimidate. Long table, dark leather chairs, glass walls overlooking the city far below. I took the seat at the head and adjusted my position so the light from behind would obscure my face when they walked in. The folder rested in front of me, centered, waiting, at exactly 10. The intercom clicked on. Miss Lane, the team from Silver Paws has arrived. Send them in, I said. My voice didn't change. I folded my hands and waited. Footsteps approached from the hallway. Then I heard his voice, loud, confident, exactly the same. He had no idea. The doors opened slowly, and I stayed exactly where I was, still, ready. It was a technique I had learned by watching Victoria dismantle executives without raising her voice. Control the light, control the room, control the silence. I adjusted the sleeve of my jacket and remained still. My breathing was steady, my pulse calm. 5 years ago, I would have been shaking in that moment. Now, I felt nothing. Not fear, not hesitation, only focus. The doors opened. Avery walked in first. She was 27 now, but there was something fragile in the way she moved. Her suit didn't quite fit. Her grip on the presentation remote was tight, almost desperate. Behind her was my father. Daniel Lane stepped into the room with the same confidence I remembered. Chin lifted, shoulders squared, acting like he belonged there. His eyes moved across the room, taking in the glass walls, the skyline, the wealth. He wasn't looking at me yet. He was imagining the deal. Go ahead, the receptionist said, gesturing forward before closing the doors behind them. The sound of the lock settling echoed through the room. My father turned toward the table. He smiled, wide and practiced, and walked forward like he had already won. Thank you for seeing us, he said, his voice carrying easily. We're excited to present something truly unique today. He extended his hand toward me, waiting, expecting. Then the light shifted, and my face came into view. He stopped, completely. His hand froze in the air. The smile disappeared instantly. His eyes widened, trying to process what he was seeing. For a second, he couldn't speak. He blinked again, faster this time, like his mind was trying to reject what he was seeing. His mouth moved, but no words came out. Avery stepped forward without looking up and ran straight into him. She steadied herself, annoyed, then finally looked down the length of the table. At first, she didn't recognize me. I didn't look like someone she remembered. The suit, the posture, the stillness. Then our eyes met. Everything changed. Odessa, she said quietly, her voice breaking. She glanced around the room, searching for an explanation that didn't make sense. What are you doing here? She asked. Are you working here? You need to go get the partner. We're already behind. I didn't move. I didn't reach for his hand. I leaned forward slightly, resting my arms on the table, and looked at them without expression. I'm not an assistant, I said calmly. The room went completely silent. I'm the partner reviewing this deal. I continued, and your financials are a disaster. I held their gaze. Sit down. My father made a strange, broken sound and dropped into the nearest chair. Avery stayed standing for a second longer, gripping the clicker in her hand. "Sit down," I repeated. This time. She obeyed. I opened the folder in front of me. I didn't ask for their presentation. I didn't give them time to speak. I started reading. "You're requesting $500,000 for a niche platform with no users, no product, and no technical foundation," I said, my eyes moving across the page before lifting back to them. "You have a leased vehicle listed as marketing, private club memberships labeled as outreach, and a high-risk loan with a default deadline at the end of this week." I turned the page slowly. "You've already burned through $300,000 without building anything functional." I tapped the numbers lightly with my pen. "You paid $40,000 for branding, zero for actual development." I looked directly at them. "This isn't a startup." My voice didn't rise. "It's a financial collapse disguised as a business." My father finally spoke. The same voice. The same tone he used years ago. Sharp. Controlling. Desperate to take back control. "Listen to me. Odessa," my father said, leaning forward, his fingers shaking as he pointed at me. "I don't know what kind of game this is, or how you ended up in that chair. But you will show your sister some respect. We came here for funding. You owe this family." His voice grew louder. "You've always been jealous of Avery. Now you're going to approve this deal, or I will speak to your superiors and have you removed." I looked at his hand. I felt nothing. No fear, no pressure, only a quiet, distant clarity. I raised my hand slightly, and he stopped talking. "This is not your house," I said. "You don't control anything here." My voice stayed even. "You are asking for money you cannot repay, in a building you don't belong in, from people who already know you've failed." I closed the folder in front of me. The sound cut through the room. "You signed a loan using your home as collateral," I continued. "When it defaults this week, the lender takes everything." I held his gaze. "The house, your savings, everything you built." The confidence drained from his face. For the first time, he looked uncertain, then afraid. He glanced down, then back at me, his voice changing completely. "Odessa, please," he said, softer now. "You can't let this happen. We're your family. We raised you. Just help her this once. She's close. She just needs more time." Beside him, Avery was already breaking, tears running, shoulders shaking. I stood up slowly. "I don't owe you anything," I said. "5 years ago, you erased my future so she could have one." I met his eyes one last time. I reviewed her results. There's nothing there. I paused. "The deal is rejected." I turned away and walked toward the door without looking back. I left them sitting there in silence, but letting the bank take everything without a face attached to it, that still felt too easy. If you think I was right to reject their funding and let them face the consequences of their own choices, if you believe I did the right thing by refusing to save the family that once destroyed my future, then drop a 1 in the comments and let me know you would have done the same. He would find a way to blame anything except himself, the system, the market, anyone but the truth. And I wasn't going to let that happen. I walked into my office, picked up the phone, and called the senior wealth manager directly. My instructions were simple. Contact the lender holding the debt on my parents' house. Acquire it immediately Use a holding company. No names attached. No trace leading back to me. I wasn't going to let a bank take their home. I was going to do it myself. 2 days later, I packed a small bag and booked a first-class flight to Chicago. I was going back. Not to visit, to finish it. I watched them leave the building earlier that day. They didn't argue, didn't raise their voices. They looked empty, like something inside them had already started collapsing. The confidence was gone, replaced by something quieter, fear. The doors had closed behind them, and for the first time, they had no control left. I stayed in the boardroom after they left, sitting in silence for a few minutes. I had already ended their last chance, but letting the system handle the rest wasn't enough. That would be too easy, too distant, too anonymous. A foreclosure by a bank would give my father an excuse. He would turn it into a story. He would say the system failed him, that the world was unfair. I couldn't allow that. He needed to know exactly why it was happening, exactly who was responsible. I made the call. I gave the instructions. In this system, debt moves quietly, bought, sold, transferred. And when something is about to collapse, there is always someone willing to take control of it. I told my wealth manager to acquire everything, every loan, every obligation tied to that house. I didn't care about the price. Within 48 hours, the transfer was complete by Thursday afternoon. The ownership had changed hands, quietly, legally, permanently. I wasn't just their daughter anymore. I was the one holding their debt, the one who could decide exactly when everything ended. With that in place, I cleared my schedule and went home to pack. 5 years ago, I had left with almost nothing: a worn bag, a few clothes, fear I couldn't show. This time was different. Everything about it was different. I packed a clean, structured bag, clothes that fit the life I had built, every detail controlled. I wasn't running anymore. I was returning, not as someone they could ignore, as someone they couldn't escape. Before I left, I thought about my mother, because my father had always been obvious, loud, direct, but she had been quieter, more careful. She never started anything. She simply allowed it, encouraged it without saying much. Everything for appearance, for status, for the image of a perfect family. She cared about how things looked, the house, the neighborhood, the life they showed to others. And that house meant everything to her. It wasn't just a place to live, it was proof of success, of control, of the version of herself she wanted the world to believe. And soon I was going to take it away. Taking that house from her would break the illusion completely. I landed at O'Hare early Friday morning. No ride share, no waiting. I walked straight to the luxury rental counter and handed over my card. I want something that makes a statement, I said. 10 minutes later, I was handed the keys, a gray Porsche Panamera, low, sharp, built to be noticed. The kind of car my father used to talk about but could never afford. I pulled onto the highway and drove toward the suburbs. Everything looked familiar. The diner where I worked endless shifts. The library where I studied just to get away. Places that used to feel heavy. Now they felt distant, like they belonged to someone else. By the time I turned onto my old street, I felt nothing, just focus. The neighborhood hadn't changed. Clean lawns, large houses, perfect surfaces, except one, Their house. It stood out immediately. Paint peeling, grass uneven, everything worn down. The cost of failure was visible now. I drove straight into the driveway and let the engine idle for a moment. The sound alone was enough to announce my presence. My mother was outside near the porch, holding a hose loosely in her hand. She looked smaller than I remembered, tired. When she heard the engine, she froze, her eyes fixed on the car like she already knew what it meant. Not hope, not help. Something else. I turned off the engine and stepped out. The door closed behind me with a solid, final sound. The air felt still. I stood there for a second, then started walking forward. Every step deliberate, every movement controlled. I wasn't the person who left this place anymore, and she could see it. I lifted my sunglasses and rested them on top of my hair. The car door closed behind me with a heavy, final sound. Then I looked straight at her, the woman who had stood there years ago and said nothing while everything burned. My mother stared back. Her eyes moved quickly, taking everything in: the car, my clothes, my posture, then my face. Her expression shifted, like her mind was struggling to catch up with reality. The version of me she remembered didn't exist anymore. The hose slipped from her hands and hit the ground, water spilling across the driveway. "Odessa," she said, barely audible. She stepped forward slowly, her voice unsteady. You look." She couldn't finish. I didn't smile. I didn't respond. I reached into the passenger seat and pulled out a thick envelope. The sound of the hose and her voice had already broken the silence. I heard movement inside the house. Footsteps. Fast. The front door opened. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. Everything was already in place. This wasn't a surprise anymore. It was the moment they had been walking toward for years. She stared at me like her mind couldn't accept what it was seeing. Her eyes moved slowly over everything: the car, the clothes, the watch on my wrist. I saw the exact moment her fear shifted into something else: hope, twisted, desperate, in her mind. This could only mean one thing: that I had come back to fix everything. "Odessa," she whispered, her voice shaking. "You came back. Look at you. We knew you wouldn't leave us like that." She took a step closer, opening her arms like she was about to embrace me, like nothing had ever happened. I didn't move. I raised my hand between us. "Don't," I said. My voice was flat, cold. Using her name instead of calling her mother hit harder than anything else. She stopped immediately, her body pulling back as if she had been struck. Before she could speak again, the front door slammed open. My father stepped out first, followed by Avery. They both froze the moment they saw me. The difference from 2 days ago was obvious. The confidence was gone. My father looked worn down, his posture heavier, his face strained. Avery stayed slightly behind him, watching me carefully, like she wasn't sure what would happen next. Their eyes moved from the car to me, then stopped. No one spoke. The neighborhood was quiet, except for the sound of water spilling across the driveway. I noticed movement to the side. The neighbor was watching, and my mother noticed too. Her expression tightened. For someone who had spent her entire life protecting appearances, this moment was unbearable. My father was the first to speak. For a second, I thought he would finally understand. He didn't. Instead, He smiled. It was forced, tight, but still there. He stepped off the porch like nothing had changed. Odessa, he said, his voice loud again, trying to sound in control. I knew you'd come back. That little scene in New York, that was just emotion. He waved it off like it meant nothing. Family is family. You're here now. We'll fix this. He gestured toward the house. Come inside. We'll go over what you need to transfer for Avery's funding. I didn't move. Not even a step. The confidence in his voice didn't match reality anymore, but he didn't see it. He still believed he could command me. I reached into the car and picked up the envelope. I didn't come to help you, I said. My voice carried clearly. I came to give you something. He stopped walking. The smile disappeared. What are you talking about? He said sharply. You have money. You're my daughter. You owe this family. I looked at him without emotion. Then I opened the envelope. I stepped forward and pressed the documents into his hands. Read it. I said. He took them automatically, like he didn't have a choice. His eyes moved across the first page, then slowed, then stopped. The color drained from his face. His hand started shaking. What is this? He whispered. I met his eyes. That, I said calmly, is everything you've been running from. When I rejected your funding on Tuesday, your company defaulted immediately. I said, your lender realized you had no assets, no way to repay anything. I pointed at the papers in his hands. They sold the debt. My voice stayed calm. I bought it. My mother gasped behind him. Avery gripped the railing, her fingers tightening until they turned white. My father looked up at me, breathing unevenly, searching for something to hold on to. You can't do this, he said. That's my house. This is family. I shook my head once. This is a transaction. I replied. You used this house as collateral for a failing business. You lost. The lender acted. I took a step forward. I replaced them. He stared at me, completely lost now. There's no way out of this. I continued. No loophole, no negotiation. I moved past him and stepped onto the porch. My eyes went straight to the window. The same room, the same place, everything changed. 5 years ago, I said quietly, you stood in there and burned everything I worked for. I turned back to face them. You told me my future didn't matter. I looked at Avery, because hers did. Then back at him. I evaluated her results. My voice didn't change. There's nothing there. I held up the document slightly. As of this morning, I own this property. The silence that followed was complete. No arguments, no excuses, just reality. But the facts were only the beginning. They still didn't understand what it meant. My mother collapsed onto the wet ground, crying uncontrollably. The water soaked through her clothes, but she didn't react. She reached toward me. I stepped back. Please, she said. I didn't know. I didn't understand. I looked down at her. You knew. I said quietly. You handed him the letters. Her face broke further. You told me I was selfish for wanting a future. I didn't raise my voice. Silence doesn't make you innocent. My father was still holding the documents, his mind racing. I can fix this, he said quickly. I'll work. I'll pay you back. Whatever it takes. I shook my head. The debt is over $1 million. I said. Even if you worked nonstop, you couldn't cover the interest. His expression fell apart completely. Then Avery stepped forward. This is insane, she said. You're destroying everything over nothing. She tried to sound confident, but it didn't hold. My company is close, she added. One more update and it works. I looked at her calmly. You don't know how to build anything, I said. Her face froze. I've seen your records. The spending, the debt, the lies. I held her gaze. You're not building a company. My voice stayed steady. You're running from failure. She didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. I reached back into the car and pulled out a single document. Then I walked up the steps and handed it to her. 30 days, I said. She looked down at the notice, her hands shaking. You pack what you can. You leave. I paused. If you're still here after that, I didn't finish the sentence. I didn't need to. My mother let out a broken sound, somewhere between a cry and a gasp. Her makeup was running, her voice shaking as she looked up at me. What are you going to do with the house? She asked. Please, just keep it in the family. I can't let people see strangers living here. Her voice cracked. The humiliation, it would destroy me. I looked at her for a moment. Then I answered, I'm not selling it. I said. She froze. I've already made arrangements. My voice stayed calm. This property is being transferred to a nonprofit organization. Her expression changed instantly. They build housing for young people with nowhere else to go. I continued. I let the words settle. I'm demolishing the house. Everything stopped. The air, the movement, even her breathing. This place will be replaced, I said, with something that actually helps people. The color drained from her face. For someone who cared more about appearances than anything else, this was worse than losing the house. It was losing the image, the reputation, the life she had built around it. My father dropped the papers. They scattered across the porch. He didn't try to argue anymore, didn't raise his voice. He just stood there, holding on to the railing like it was the only thing keeping him upright. The reality had finally reached him. There was nothing left to fight. I turned away. No apologies, no final words, just silence. I walked down the steps and past my mother without looking at her. And this time, I didn't stop. She didn't try to stop me again. Whatever she had been holding on to was already gone. I opened the car door and slid into the driver's seat. The leather was cool, clean, controlled. I put my sunglasses back on and started the engine. The sound cut through the quiet street one last time as I backed out. I looked through the window. My father stood on the porch, staring at the papers like he still didn't understand. Avery was holding the eviction notice, her shoulders shaking. My mother remained on the ground, surrounded by everything she had tried so hard to protect. It was all there, the result of every choice they made. I pulled onto the street and drove forward. I didn't look back. There was nothing left behind for me. The story didn't end there. People always ask the same question. If I felt guilty, if I hesitated, if I thought about turning around, the answer is simple. No. Guilt belongs to people who have done something wrong. I didn't. I paid back everything that was ever taken from me. They made their decisions. They lived with the outcome. And for the first time in my life, I was completely free. I didn't destroy them. I stepped aside and let their choices reach their conclusion. As I drove toward the airport, I didn't feel regret. I felt lighter than I ever had. The weight I carried for years was gone. I returned the car, boarded my flight, and watched the clouds pass beneath me. That chapter was closed. Completely. People often make threats they never follow through on. I don't. 30 days later, the deadline arrived. Security and local authorities went to the house to enforce it. They were already gone. They had moved into a small apartment across town, a different neighborhood, a different life. My father was working long shifts at a warehouse. Avery had taken a job at a retail store. The house stood empty. 2 weeks after that, the demolition began. I went back to see it. I stood across the street and watched as everything came down. The walls, the roof, the fireplace, the place where everything changed. Piece by piece, it disappeared. And when it was over, something else took its place. A building meant for people who needed a way out. A place that gave others what I never had. And that was the only ending that ever made sense. The new building is fully funded and maintained by my company. I took the place where my future was supposed to end and turned it into a place where others can begin. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is step away and let people face the consequences they created. I didn't need to save them. I had already saved myself. And I didn't do it alone. I built something new, a different kind of family. In New York, I found people who valued growth, not control. Victoria taught me something I had never understood before. Being related to someone doesn't give them the right to stay in your life. Support isn't about holding someone back. It's about pushing them forward. She never asked me to be smaller. She expected me to become more. That changed everything. Real power isn't loud. It doesn't come from shouting or forcing control. It comes from knowing exactly when to act and following through. Now, I sit in rooms where decisions shape entire industries. I'm surrounded by people who challenge me, respect me, and recognize my value. For the first time, I belong. Growing up, I believed something was wrong with me, that if I tried harder, stayed quieter, did everything right, maybe I would be enough. But I understand it now. They didn't need me to succeed. They needed someone to blame. Avery was their proof, their excuse, the version of success they showed the world. And I was the cost of maintaining that illusion. They needed me to fail so their story could make sense. If I succeeded, everything they believed about themselves would collapse. My father didn't destroy my future out of hate. He did it out of fear, because deep down, he knew the truth. If I left, if I built something bigger, I would expose everything they tried to hide. Their rejection was never about me. It was about them. I learned something most people never want to admit. Sometimes love is not about staying. It's about leaving before you lose yourself completely. I wasn't saved by luck. I was saved by a decision the moment I chose to stop proving my worth to people who had already decided I had none. The hardest part wasn't walking away. It was accepting that I was allowed to. If you were in my place, would you have stayed and kept trying? Or would you have chosen yourself? Even if it meant burning every bridge behind you, I'm genuinely curious, did you listen all the way to the end? And if you did, thank you. That means more than you think. If this story made you pause, even for a second, then you're already part of something bigger. Every like, every comment, Every share helps this message reach someone who might be stuck in a place they don't deserve to be in. And your one click, your decision to subscribe, might be the exact push someone else needs to change their life. So if you feel this matters, don't just watch Be the Reason It Spreads.